I'm going to show you how to turn this into this, using techniques and effects that will make anything look amazing. And once it's all set up, adjusting just one property creates all of these hypnotic shapes and colors with absolutely no skill required. Okay, we're starting in a blank comp that is 10 seconds long, and we need to create some random colorful shapes to start working with. So let's select our rectangle tool, we'll make our fill 100% red, and just start clicking and drawing rectangles all over the place. There, now we're going to deselect that layer by clicking somewhere else. We're going to change the fill color to 100% blue and do the same again. And then do the same with green. And now let's take some time to rename them because we always label our layers. And now we need some randomish chaotic motion, which we're going to do with rotation. So we'll select them all, open up rotation with R on our keyboard, and we'll keyframe them all at the start at 0 degrees. And then let's go to the very end of the comp at 10 seconds. We're going to start with red, and the first thing we're going to do is move the anchor point. So we'll select our anchor point tool here and move that towards the middle. Doesn't need to be exact, but somewhere around there if your anchor point isn't already there. Let's do the same with blue and green while we're here, just so they're all rotating around the center roughly. Alright, now 10 seconds in, let's increase the rotation of the red layer to around 90 degrees. And now for blue, let's rotate this even further. Let's go almost up to a full rotation, around 360 degrees. We don't need to be exact, and we're going to welcome some happy accidents. So now those two layers are rotating at different speeds. For our green one, let's rotate it in the other direction. Let's go minus a full rotation. There, some nice randomish motion. Now to get even more colors, we're going to select these all and change their blending mode from normal to add. And that means not just red, green, and blue, we now get cyan, magenta, and yellow where they overlap, and white where all three of them overlap as well. Essentially, we've just created some randomish shapes, randomish colors, and a randomish movement. Lovely. And now the fun really begins, because this effect is all done on one adjustment layer. And we're going to start by adding the effect CC Collider, which essentially turns everything into a kaleidoscope by chopping and flipping parts of the animation underneath. And it's already looking really interesting. And we're just going to use this as a base for causing more randomness for our effect. So next we're going to create some more interesting, pleasing results using some other effects that you might not have used before, or if you have, you haven't used them in this way. So first, let's get this looking a little bit nicer. Let's drag it back to the beginning, and we're going to increase its size from 20 to around 50. And that's just increasing the area of the comp it's looking for before it flips and rotates them all around. And Collider also has different mirroring options, which just rotate it and flip it in different ways. Now, I really like Starfish. This is my favorite, because it cuts it into a kind of sort of pizza slice kind of setup where there's 8 versions poking out of the middle here, and it creates some really nice symmetry. We also have the rotation property up here, which rotates what's inside of those pizza slices. And if we just move the rotation property, that looks pretty good on its own without any animation underneath. So let's keyframe this property. Let's keyframe rotation at 0 at the start here, and then at 10 seconds in, let's give it a full rotation. Let's go all the way up to 360. Let's see how that looks. Even more chaotic. Lovely. Another thing we can move is the center. We can choose different areas to be the center of the kaleidoscope. And if we want this area to start in the very center, we can click floating center. And now wherever we drag this will be the exact middle where those pizza slices all converge. Now you could animate this property as well, which could be really interesting, but for us, we're going to keep this still. Let's keep it aligned with the very middle and about 3/4 away down the comp. Now, if you do find you don't have enough of any certain colors in here, you might want a bit more red or a bit more green or blue, just select the layer that you want more of, and with the rectangle tool selected, you can just draw another red shape if you want to fill it out more. I think we've got a nice blend though, so I'm going to leave it as is. And it's also pretty hard to tell whereabouts in the kaleidoscope the effect is sort of pulling these sections from. So I've created this little guide, which you can kind of use as a map to figure out where it's pulling from. If you just drag that under effects, you can see that it's mainly pulling from the red and white areas here, especially the bottom right corner. In this section here, it's barely getting anything else. And for us, that doesn't really matter because we've got a mix of all of our colors in each quarter. But if you really want a specific part of your comp to be included in the kaleidoscope, an image like this might be helpful. And you can download this image along with the project file for free down in the description as well, if you'd like that to help you get started. All right, let's hide that guide. And we're going to take this effect to the next level with some even more effects. All right, the next is CC Radial Fast Blur. Let's turn off CC Collider so we can see what it's doing on its own. Let's increase the amount so it's even more obvious. Let's go up to 85. And this is essentially blurring everything out from the center. And what I really love about this effect is that we do get some nice soft blurry edges where the colors blend into one another. We get some nice soft gradients, but we also keep some harsh edges. So it's not just all one big soft blob. So here it is with CC Collider back on, and we're going to put Radial Fast Blur above CC Collider in the effect stack so it's applied before, and now we get a nice, really cool glowy sort of effect, which I think looks great. And the next effect we're going to add is CC Lens. And that just distorts everything into a circle. So let's adjust that. Let's increase the size to about 100 so it fills up pretty much all of the screen. And now let's move the center. We've essentially just got a circular lens that is just distorting our image and creating some nice warping effects. Let's keep this in the middle and maybe just a bit above the center of our kaleidoscope. And it is revealing the edges of our comp here. So let's maybe increase the size of that lens a little bit. And this just helps to further remove the animation from that flat, repeated kaleidoscope look into something that's just a bit more interesting. Now, next is one of my favorite effects to give it more of a vintage feel, and that is Noise HLS Auto. Let's change the noise type to grain, the lightness up to 10%, and the grain size to 2. And this just gives a really nice film grain look that I really like, that I kind of associate as well with the 60s and 70s psychedelia, and it just makes it feel a bit more organic. And here we've got a decent set of effects and properties to play with, and pretty much anything you adjust here will still look good. You can put anything underneath it and it will still look pretty mesmerizing, even the least interesting things you can think of. And if you want to turn off any of the colors, you can turn off the blue to restrict your color palette even further. Let's turn them all back on though. Let's add another warping effect, and that is Twirl. And if we leave that at the bottom of our effect stack and increase the angle, we can see what this effect does, which is essentially swirl our composition in a spiral in the center, which gets some interesting looks on its own. And we can also animate this property if you wish. Let's keep ours pretty static. I think around 230 degrees looks pretty good. And we're going to drag that up the effect stack between Radial Fast Blur and Collider. And let's turn that on and off and we can see the difference that makes. Here's it off, here's it on. And now let's play that again. There, look at that. Now we're getting a lot more of a kind of flowery mandala kind of effect, which is even more reminiscent of the psychedelic patterns. And essentially what this has done is, let's remove all these effects. It's swirled the middle and it's tightened that area here. So we get some areas of large, flat, soft colors and some areas that are just a little tighter. And that turns out to be pretty hypnotic. Now, if this effect is a bit too liney for your style, a bit too sharp, which I think it is just a bit for me, we can add another blur. So let's this time add a Gaussian blur, and let's put that before the twirl, and let's add a fair bit of blurriness. Let's go all the way up to 100. There it is off, and there it is on. So now it is much softer, and our twirl is still twirling those shapes, but it's twirling softer shapes. So we get a really nice in-between effect. And what I really love about adding this blur here is the colors. Just look at these colors it's creating. We started off with pure red, green, and blue layers, and now we've gotten this. And these colors remind me so much of those early 70s psychedelic posters and designs that have these sort of muddy, deep greens and some weird browns, alongside really saturated colors like pinks and yellows. And these are colors I certainly wouldn't choose if I was just picking colors from a palette myself, because on their own, they seem maybe pretty ugly, but the way they blend and complement each other to me is just so nice. Now, your experience may vary, but I love them. And this could be a really good way to find new color palettes or even experiment with colors that you didn't think would work together. So let's find a frame that we like the colors of. Here, this one looks pretty good. And if we just want to make some variations of this, we can grab any of our shape layers and just move it slightly. And as we do that, all the hues are going to shift because our colors are blurring and combining in different ways. So just by moving it a few pixels to the side, we get a completely different palette. Let's undo that because I like it the way it was before, but again, another idea of how you can experiment with this. Now, some more effects we can apply is to apply the effect warp on top. And there are tons of warp styles. I like arc lower and arc upper. And again, these are just quite good for adding a kind of subtleish warp to just get more interesting shapes out of these effects. Or we can even add another CC Collider effect over the top if you want it to be more patterny. And of course, you can adjust this even more as well. Now, this is a bit too much for me, but you can really start to see the endless possibilities for cool, unique shapes, colors, and motion, which is really procedural and generative once you have a few of these effects applied. And it really is as fun as it looks. But we can still use this to create great effects and work within the confines of a client brief and still have just as much fun, especially with the help of this video's sponsor, Millernote. Millernote is an amazing web app that allows you to organize your projects from the start to the end on interactive visual boards with a simple drag and drop interface. It's really intuitive and removes a lot of the friction of creating boards, scripts, storyboarding, and whatever else your project needs. Plus, importantly, collaborating, giving, and receiving feedback. And it's all in one place, which is so useful when collaborating. Now, mood boards are just my favorite tool to get on the same page as a client or teammate. Communicating the vibe and feel of a project is something that is so important to do, but also so hard to do in writing or even in person. I like to quickly share what I'm thinking with references to other projects and previous work, so when you do start working on it, you're not worried if your work is going to be wasted because your client doesn't like it. You've already established that quickly by sharing your inspiration, your references, and other ideas on the board. It's less risky for everyone else involved, and once you're on the same page, you know the confines of what you can experiment with and just how wild you can go with that shared destination in mind. You're also in total control of who can edit, comment, or give feedback on your boards. And then, when you're good and ready, you can share a secret link to specific boards with a client, and there's no sign up required to view either. Millernote has also generously offered to give away a full year of their Pro subscription to 3 viewers who sign up using the link down in the description. Okay, now let's turn off that last CC Collider effect and that warp as well. And one thing I have noticed is that a few times in this animation, we get these full harsh black shapes here, which do stand out. And what they are is a result of our twirl. So let's turn off all our other effects on top. And we can see the twirl is just pulling up our bottom edge here. Let's just decrease the twirl radius a bit. There, we still get that twirl effect, but we don't get those big black pockets anymore. Okay, now let's say we get some feedback. They love the psychedelic colors, but without this mandala flower shape, instead something involving their logo. We can do that. First, let's duplicate this main comp. Let's call it Kaleidoscope 2 logo, and let's drag in a logo, which is mine for demonstration purposes. And let's pre-comp this logo with Control-Shift-C and just rename this logo and hit OK. And we're putting this in a pre-comp so we can swap it out later. Now let's align this to the very center, maybe shrink it down just a bit so it's not completely overtaking our composition. And we're going to add a new solid with Control-Y, and we're going to make it 50% gray. And you'll see why in a moment. Let's put that underneath our bat and set the logo's blending mode to screen so it's just white on 50% gray. Now let's go back to our kaleidoscope comp, and we're going to hide that logo comp layer. And we're going to integrate that into our psychedelic kaleidoscope using another effect, which is displacement map. Add that to our effect stack, and there is a lot of effects here. So let's toggle these all down so all their properties aren't visible, and we can see them all. And we can already see some slight displacement happening. We can see a bit of our rectangle showing through and affecting our layers. And we need to change that to use our logo. So what a displacement map does is it warps or displaces our image based on a map, which is another layer. And we can choose that by selecting displacement map layer, and we're going to choose logo. And if we look closely, we can kind of see our bat shining through a little bit here. But we can make that really obvious by dragging the max horizontal or vertical displacement. There we go. Now it's really clear. And the max horizontal and vertical displacement is just how far in either direction, horizontal or vertical, it's going to warp or displace the image. Now, I'm going to turn horizontal displacement down to 0 to keep it completely symmetrical, and increase the max vertical displacement to, actually let's go down, let's go to minus 150-ish. There, now our logo is looking interesting. And the displacement map is using for horizontal displacement the red channel and vertical displacement the green channel. Now, our layer is black and white, so that doesn't really matter. We can change it to luminous though, or brightness, and that will affect it the same. And what essentially it's doing is it's looking at the black or white values, or the red values depending on what it's set to. And if it's black, it's moving it 150 pixels in one direction. If our layer is white, it's moving it 150 pixels in the other direction. And if it's gray, it's not moving anything at all, which is why we have a gray background. So the only thing being moved is the white areas of our comp, which is our logo. So anything but our bat stays exactly the same. And we can use that information to get some more interesting warping too. And that is by changing how it sees that map. At the moment, it is taking just its source. But if we change it to effects and masks, any effects or masks that we apply to this layer will be considered for warping by our displacement map. So let's add a Gaussian blur to our logo layer, and let's see what happens when we start increasing the blurriness. We get a bit more interesting warping around the edges as it gets softer. So let's increase the blurriness up to around 30. So if we turn that layer on, you can see that the blurriness is really softening the edges. So instead of pure gray and pure white, so we're going to get a transition in the amount of displacement, and that is going to look like it warping around over the edges in a nice soft way. There, now that is looking cool. Now our client said they wanted less of the flower effect, so let's go into our effects and remove the twirl layer, and we can actually delete the other layers we're not using, CC Collider and Warp, and let's drag noise on top of the effect stack, so it's the very last thing applied, which will give everything underneath that nice consistent noisy effect there. And we might also want to turn down that Gaussian blur. Let's turn it down to 50, so it's not quite as soft because we don't have that twirl to compete with anymore. There, and because our logo is in a pre-comp, we can put anything inside that comp and it will affect this outer layer and the warping. So let's drag in a type version of my logo, and that again looks pretty cool if I don't say so myself. And here's what an animated version of my logo looks like with these kind of pulsing bubbles on the outside, which give a nice energy blast feel. Alright, client loves this one, but someone on my team thinks that we should take these ideas and develop a separate version for a cyberpunk spin-off that is more digital. Alright, let's make a duplicate version of this comp, and let's make some changes in here. Now for this one, we're going to remove anything that's too circular and organic. So let's go into effects, we're going to delete that twirl, delete our CC lens, and let's delete our noise as well. And now we can see our displacement map is warping our image, and we're exposing the void, the background behind it. So if we just click warp pixels around, that should fix that up nicely. There we are. And let's also try another style of mirroring from Collider. Let's change it from starfish to just unfold. There, that's a bit more squarer. We're not getting all that radial pizza slice effect. Nice. And let's maybe turn down the blurriness of that turbulent displace as well, down to 20, just so it's a little less blurry. We'll also maybe adjust the collider a little bit more. Let's maybe increase the size from 50 to 80, just so there's less repeating going on, and it's looking less like that kaleidoscope and more just like a strange neon void. And we're going to make this more digital by pixelating it. So let's add the effect mosaic, and let's put that above before our displacement map. Let's give this more blocks. We want to keep it in a 16:9 ratio. So I'm going to give it 160 horizontal blocks and 90 vertical blocks. There we go, that's looking nice and pixelated. I think these pixels are a little bit too detailed though. Let's half of that. So we'll go 80:45. There we go, we've got nice bigger blocks. That's more obvious. And I think to soften it up, let's add another Gaussian blur over the top of everything. And let's just blur that 10 pixels, just so it's a little bit softer and everything is all confined within that. Nice. Now it is looking a bit digital and cyberpunky, but I think one thing that we can really do is just make it darker. There's a few too many areas where the screen is just absolutely full of these neon colors, and it kind of looks more like a Predator thermal vision or like a weather map. So to make it darker, we just need to remove some of those shapes from our original shape layer. And the easiest way to do that is select our 3 shape layers, and in the search bar here, just type rectangle. So it's going to show up all of our rectangle paths, and we're just going to randomly make some of them invisible. We're going to hide their visibility, and I'm not doing this in any particular way, just clicking and dragging to hide a bunch of them. We can always turn them back on if it gets too dark. Let's see how that looks. Okay, that's maybe a bit too dark. Let's turn a few more of them back on. There we are. Now it looks like our bat is flying through a lit up cyberpunk digital void. And if at any point we have kind of veered away from the colors that we promised the client with a mood board, maybe we got caught up in the excitement of blending and creating all those wild psychedelic colors, we can always refer back to our original mood board. And a quick way to get those specific colors into our animation is to just use one of those images underneath all of our effects. Let's duplicate our original kaleidoscope comp, and let's tame these wild colors back to a specific palette. So let's drag in our palette reference. I'm going to keep a copy on top here so we can refer back to it, and I'm going to make a copy and just drag it under our effects. Okay, now we're going to need this to fill up the comp, so let's hide our effects so we can at least see what we're doing, and let's scale this up so it fills our comp. We can probably hide all of our shape layers as well. Maybe let's put this on an angle to make it more interesting. Let's duplicate it with Command or Control D and drag a copy over to the left. And now let's turn back on our effects, and we can see we have those colors, but they are very, very dull. So let's make some quick adjustments to our effects to change that. Let's turn down this Gaussian blur from 100 to 50 to bring back a bit of the brightness so they're not quite as muddy and blended into one another. And then we're going to add a hue and saturation effect at the very end, well, underneath our noise at least. And let's just increase the saturation a decent amount. Let's go all the way up to maybe 65 there. And there we are, we have a nice psychedelic kaleidoscope animation with colors that match exactly to our reference. And this is even without animating anything to do with these images as well. We could animate their rotation to add a more wild effect as well, or keep them static and let the CC Collider rotation do all of the work. Now the grain is looking particularly heavy here as well, so maybe let's turn the lightness down from 10% to 5%, and that's just a little bit more palatable. And in practically no time, we've created a bunch of similar effects that are really fun to experiment with and adjust. And don't forget, you can download this project file with all of these for free down in the description. And if you want to delve even deeper into this world, I have got a full-blown advanced animation course that is overflowing with concepts and techniques to take your work to the next level. You'll find a link to that in the description. And if you've got a technique that is just as fun to use in After Effects, please let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.